Well, this also one has to start from the very beginning. The idea was to focus on deficit rather than surplus. There are two ways of looking at things or looking at transforming the society. One is to focus on the theory of surplus, and other is to focus on theory of deficit. Now, if you look at the history of European Union or even China, they succeeded by focusing on the theory of surplus. European Union came out mainly because they were focusing on very early on coal as you know, one of the what you call substance which they had, iron and coal which they had in surplus. So both Germany and China started cooperating on that because they had lot, and that particular substance also you know, was, one can speak about having a kind of relationship with the war machinery. So they thought, let us bring this two substance in one common platform, and from there this economic cooperation became European Union. Okay. Similarly, China also focused on surplus, and their focus was on human, mainly on the human capital. And we have seen how China has transformed because the entire focus was on human capital. On the other hand, when it comes to SAARC or BIMSTEC, the focus has always been on the theory of deficit, what we have less. So we started with trade. Now trade is always, you know, hardly, there's only 5%, it has never gone beyond 5%. So unlike the coal and steel that we have in European Union, I'm sorry, not coal and iron, coal and steel that we have in European Union, we should have thought about something of that kind, that what we have more in this region. Now, one thing that we have more is people, and the other is water. None of these got focused, particularly in BIMSTEC. So when the Rohingya crisis started, first of all, I think back in 21, you know, way back in last 21 years, or when they started, they never thought in their wildest dream that something of Rohingya would become the crisis in BIMSTEC. So they never, you know, focused on that, and the idea was that since we are focusing on economic and technical cooperation, you know, that should suffice. But then you have a bigger problem. You almost, you know, the elephant was in the room, but they were not looking at the elephant. So here you have a bigger problem and a bigger issue, mainly because the focus was never on human capital. If the focus had been on the human capital, then Rohingyas would have been registered, because 21 years back they were stateless. They are still stateless. So at least there would have been some discussion of a particular group of people not having citizenship, not having right kind of literacy, etc. So the focus has always been on non-human kind of thing, you know, connectivity, building road, infrastructure. Roads don't build humans, humans build road. So you need a radical departure from the kind of thinking that both SAARC and BIMSTEC they started with. So we have seen what you call the fate of SAARC. It's now dormant, mainly because of India and Pakistan's conflict. But I guess I don't think even if they start meeting tomorrow, they can do much, because as I said, they are focusing on deficit. They need to focus on surplus. So on the issue of the Rohingya case, I think if they want to change and if they want to make BIMSTEC active and fruitful, the focus ought to be on human capital. Once that is done, then I believe immediately Rohingya would become an issue. As we speak at this moment, that structure is not there. Well, you know, from India's standpoint, I think there is an element of anti-Pakistan But then BIMSTEC also has members like Thailand. Now, why would Thailand be interested in anti-Pakistan? There's no earthly reason, because that's not their main issue. So the very fact they're talking about terrorism, I think mainly because I don't think they have anything else to talk about. What else they can do? If you are serious in technical and economic cooperation, I think India has to do more than other countries, because much of the obstacles that we see and the irritation that we see in South Asia, particularly on the economic front, the neighboring countries always say it's India who is not, either through non-traditional barriers or through other means. India has to open up much more in all respect. Now that's quite difficult in the election year. Don't forget, even India is going to face election. So what do you talk about? So terrorism is a good one, because by terrorism you can actually build an argument internationally, and also helps his local support base, which is predominantly what you call, I would say, from one particular religious group, particularly Hindus. So there's a little bit of anti-Muslim bashing, and any talk of terrorism now has an anti-Muslim element. So, from political point of view, it makes sense. But for BIMSTEC, I don't think it's going to help BIMSTEC. It doesn't at all make a difference to BIMSTEC. So it's a non-starter. Any discussion on terrorism, you can talk about terrorism, but I don't think the forum was made for that. And after adding that, the worst part was they failed to talk about state terrorism, because the biggest terrorism that we have in BIMSTEC is Myanmar, and it's not us telling, it's the UN straightly pointing out that the Myanmar military has committed a genocide or crime against humanity, or war crime, and those are all internationally legally defined concept. So since the Myanmar military has done that, and if BIMSTEC remains silent, then what you are doing is you are almost allowing a terrorist state to go free. Now that, I think, is the worst thing that can happen to BIMSTEC, because this is going to create a different kind of reaction, not only within BIMSTEC but also outside BIMSTEC, and nobody is going to take BIMSTEC seriously. So it's unfortunate that they have not talked about state terrorism, although Modi talked about terrorism, should have mentioned about state terrorism. So I don't see the kind of quote unquote achievements, particularly after the summit, when report starts coming and people say, oh, BIMSTEC flagged terrorism, one should not take that to be an achievement. Rather, I think it's more a non-achievement, because it doesn't help BIMSTEC at all. So we need to go back to the basic rationale as to why we need a technical and economic cooperation. If we can open up BIMSTEC to other countries, that I think would be more important, particularly those countries who are now well qualified to invest in technical and economic cooperation. Only then I think you can transform a negative kind of an approach to a positive kind of approach. Unless that is done, I'm afraid, at least I don't see the future of BIMSTEC to be bright.